welcome to today's official launch. It's fantastic to have you all here for the event today. I'd like to start off by firstly introducing some very important people. Firstly, His Excellency, the Australian High Commissioner to Singapore, Bruce Gosper. Bruce has been a fantastic supporter of the university and its efforts in the research field, so it's great to have Bruce here today. I'd also like to recognise the General Manager of National Australia Bank Asia, Neil Parekh. Neil, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. It's great to have you here today as well. And of course, I'd like to also thank James Cook University's Chancellor, Mr Bill Tweddell. Thanks very much, Chancellor, for coming. And also the Vice Chancellor and President, Professor Sandra Harding. Thanks also. So it's actually fantastic that we're all here today for the event. This launch represents the university's first business-focused research centre, and it's another exciting step forward for the university, and its endeavours to drive quality, forward-thinking research. So now moving forward with the agenda, I'd now like to introduce the Chancellor, Bill Tweddell, to say a few words. Thanks very much, Bill.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be able to welcome you all to this launch of the Centre for International Trade and Business in Asia at James Cook University, Singapore. I do so obviously in my capacity as Chancellor of James Cook University, but also as someone who enjoyed a 40-year career in diplomacy, centred by choice in Asia. In fact, 6 of my 8 long-term postings overseas were spent working and living in Asia. So James Cook University's strong presence in Singapore, which is admirably underlined today with our historic launch, is a matter to which my personal commitment is very strong. With rapid population and economic growth, our region's influence is set to rise and to rise dramatically. This trend brings with it a need to bring together scholars and practitioners to look at how businesses and industries in our region can help meet Australia's import needs and to nurture new commercial opportunities to the benefit both of Australia, of course, but also to Singapore. To use an example, South Asia, where I spent 3 of my overseas postings, has the highest proportion of land area classified as agriculture, 61% in 2010. Stock holdings have jumped and cereal yields have almost doubled since 1980. In fact, economic growth in the tropics has outperformed the rest of the world over the past 30 years, driven by the South Asia and Southeast Asian regions, which now provide 10.3% of all global economic output. South Asia has also reported the fastest growth in per capita GDP in the world, increasing at an average rate of 4.6% per annum, and the strongest growth in exports of goods and services as a proportion of GDP. And this strong import and trade growth is attributable to the introduction of more liberal trade policies in the early 1990s in India and Bangladesh, respectively, in fact, my longest and my first overseas postings, as it happens. Also, with Southeast Asia, South Asia is the largest agriculture producer in the tropics, with production increasing from 32,000 tonnes in 32,000 tonnes to 4 million, that's in 1950, the year of my birth, to 4 million tonnes by 2010. So you see what I'm talking about here. Because of the nature of this growth, this region's growing influence, we now more than ever need to take a global view of how we address best these challenges and realise the region's growth potential and its opportunities. This centre, we believe, provides an environment for that to happen, an environment where new research collaborations and opportunities can emerge, and in addition, the research conducted by the Centre for International Trade and Business in Asia has strong practical and policy implications for our university, for our region, and well beyond. We know that when Asia becomes more urbanised and more affluent, their needs to import will only increase, and that makes this centre even more globally relevant and important. By bringing together minds, scholars and practitioners across a range of different areas, international trade, business, economic development, finance and banking, and sustainable urban planning in one centre, we will be able to help our stakeholders harness the tremendous opportunities that exist in the region through high impact academic research. As the Chancellor, and a relatively new one, I'm proud of the role James Cook University is fulfilling here through this centre for Singaporean scholars and practitioners and for our stakeholders. And I feel a profound sense of pride in knowing that this centre and its international business research team will provide both Singapore and Australia with a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms that drive trade and business in Asia and its future growth potential. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to a very good morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, for those words. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Neil Parekh. Neil is the General Manager of National Australia Bank Asia. In his current role, Neil is responsible for all business, regulatory and governance matters in the Asia region. Neil joined NAB in 2013 from Natixis, where he was the Head of Corporate and Institutional Banking Coverage for Asia and a member of the Executive Institutional Banking Committee for Asia Pacific. In this role, he was responsible for all client coverage and deal origination in the region. Neil's prior experience with financial institutions includes senior roles with Societe Generale, where he was the Global Head of Non-Investment Grade Finance and Head of US Debt Capital Markets. And at DBS, where he was the Global Head of FIG and Head of the Middle East region. Neil has also worked with the Bank of America in various product and client coverage roles. A fantastic background and a real privilege and honour to have Neil here today. So Neil, I'd like you to come forward and say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. You know, when someone reads your bio, you say, is that really me? His Excellency, Mr. Bruce Gosper, Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, and my good friend, Deputy Vice Chancellor, and friends. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. And from my perspective, it is a wonderful opportunity for me to come and speak to you. So the topic I will share my thoughts on is Singapore as a trading hub. And in my view, to understand Singapore's prominence as a trading hub, we got to go back and look at the Singapore story. Many of you may be familiar with this Singapore story, and some perhaps maybe less so. So if you go back to the 1800s, when the British were expanding in the region, and they wanted a port to take advantage of the increasing trade between India and Singapore, they identified they needed a port in the Malay Peninsula, and they identified Singapore as the place to be. From that time onwards, they went on to set up what is called the Straits Settlements in 1826, with Malacca and Penang being part of that. And I'm just going to fast forward a lot from 1826 to 1965, when Singapore left the Malay Union. If this was Kuala Lumpur, they would say, we let Singapore go from the Malay Union. It depends how you look at it, but the fact is there was a separation that took place. So thereafter commenced what I consider Singapore's struggle to survive. And being paranoid is often the best way to be successful, because you're always on your feet, you're always hungry, and you're always, how do I put it, you feel under pressure to perform. And I think Singapore is the best case for that. So as many of you know, Lee Kuan Yew, back in 1957, said that the idea of an independent Singapore seemed at first a political, economic, and geographical absurdity. It's not hard to say why. An island of 580 square kilometers, no natural resources, no hinterland, no industry to speak of. Not only did we depend on the world for food and energy, but also for water. Industrial strife at the time was common, unemployment was close to 10%, and basically the challenges were innumerable. The leadership at that time identified that economic growth was the only pathway out. And it took advantage of the strategic location just being placed where we are. I gotta get back. Saw the advantage of being an ideal trading hub, which it has blossomed to be. So in 53 years since 1965, a little less than Chancellor, but very close, a laser-like focus on economic development has essentially seen the transition of Singapore from a third world to the first world country and being positioned as a leading trading hub. So let's fast forward to where we are today. Asia is the epicenter of global trade. And I think no better person can address that issue, which I'm sure he'll be happy to share his views when we are enjoying the wonderful food that seems to be waiting for us at the back. As you can see, food is important in my life. Bruce, of course, is an expert in the area, but the reality is Singapore's done a fantastic job with its limited resources to become the preeminent trading hub that we are today. And if you see the last 2 decades, what has really taken place is very significant. You got world-class warehousing, logistics, and other facilities for fulfillment. And regulation has become probably the best in the world, if not certainly in Asia, which is from a standpoint that any unnecessary regulation has been done away with for the large part, other than for labor issues which have cropped up recently. So if you look at who's in Singapore from a trading hub standpoint, you got a who's who of companies here, but if you look at what Singapore provides by sector, for each sector. So if you look at energy, Asia's largest physical oil trading hub, largest concentration of oil storage, world's largest bunkering port for metals and mining, key hub for base metals, iron ore and coal, 70% of metals and mining companies and 60% of the top 30 steel companies have operations in Singapore. Clearing center for over 90% globally traded iron ore swaps, which is the basic modality of trades there. In the agri sector, Singapore is the Asia-Pacific hub for grains, palm oil, rubber, and sugar. 70% of the agri trading takes place in Singapore. Besides that, connected with that is the third largest foreign exchange market and offers the best US dollar liquidity in Asia for sure. Houses more than 400 regional local commodity players across the region, marketplace for 80% of world's top oil, gas, metals, and materials and agri companies here. Just goes to show where we have come from in 1965 in Singapore to where we are today. Annual turnover today, according to EDB, is 1.2 trillion US dollars, which is, as compared to even 15 years ago, is more than 2x. So the real question is, what does the future hold with Donald being Donald and the world being the way it is? In my view, Singapore has the potential to keep on its growth pattern, irrespective of who's in the White House or who has the keys to power in Beijing. I think the fact that Singapore is the largest commodity trading hub is going to be undisputed, largely because of location as well as investments that have already taken place here. The government also recognizes that disruptive technologies such as use of blockchain, data analytics, AI are changing the way global trade is done. And we've been at the forefront of adjustment and providing systems for many trading companies. From a banking perspective, most banks here, and we have 146 members of the Association of Banks in Singapore, on which I sit on the governing council of, and every week we have another bank looking to apply to be a member of ABS. And you look at that and said, quite frankly, some of the bank names I don't even recognize anymore while we're approving. And we just got to make sure they're legit banks. But the fact is everyone wants to be in Singapore. And why do they want to be in Singapore is really financing a trade, which is the core of the financing prospects locally in Singapore. It also serves as a tremendous hub because of the trade that happens here. So if I may fast forward to tackling the opportunities and challenges brought on by these new technological advancements. In my view, there are going to be many changes in the trade spectrum in the years to come. However, location and logistics are going to be key to maintaining our edge. So technology is one. We obviously need to be on the cutting edge of that and make sure that we have the right, we are on top of the technologies that are needed to maintain our trading edge. But the reality is, it's really location more than anything else when you're trading physical commodities, and I don't think that's going to change in the near future. So I'm very optimistic about trade in Singapore's role in trade. So Singapore has reinvented itself time and again in the past, and today is no different. The country is investing heavily in technology for trade and also for fintech and other allied areas that have an important role to play to facilitate trade finance. So I think these efforts bode well, and to me the future looks bright, as I mentioned earlier, although we have much work to do. So Singapore continues to strive and prosper as a leading trading hub and remains proactive in riding the wave of change. So in my view, JCU needs to be complimented for setting up the Center for International Trade and Business in Asia in its Singapore campus rather than any other campus, because I think this is really the place where all the action is. So with that, I'll thank you, and I look forward to chatting with all of you as we enjoy Bruce's comments later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for those insightful words. I also share your sense of optimism about the future. So, yeah, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to discuss those things today. I'd now like to move forward to show you a little bit more about what the Centre is actually stands for and what we're trying to achieve by showing you a short 90-second clip.
With annual economic growth of over 5% in recent years, Asia provides a wealth of business opportunities. The Centre for International Trade and Business in Asia at James Cook University, Singapore, brings together expertise in international trade, business, economic development, banking and finance, and sustainable urban planning to successfully carry out research and consultancy projects throughout Asia that helps our stakeholders harness the tremendous opportunities that exist in the region.
Our international business research team provides management and organisational solutions to international ventures moving into and from emerging economies. Our international trade researchers provide a detailed understanding of non-tariff barriers and neo-protectionist policies and their potential impact on businesses and economies in Asia.
Our team in urban planning and design brings together the best of academia and the best of industry to develop policies for the design of smart and sustainable urban environments.
With our qualified and committed team, the Centre for International Trade and Business in Asia provides a platform for symposiums and conferences, advanced analytical tools, and customised consultancy services. We look forward to collaborations and partnerships with businesses, government institutions, industry associations, and academia to explore opportunities and tackle the challenges facing the Asian region.
So, thank you. Yeah, that's a little bit about what we are and what we're trying to achieve here in Singapore. But before we conclude our event, I'd like to invite the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sandra Harding, to give her traditional concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Jake, but I also want to acknowledge His Excellency, the High Commissioner here. Bruce is such a good friend, of course the Chancellor, but we have so many friends. I'm seeing Philip and John and so many friends here, and it's very good of you all to come along. We're just very grateful to you. I just have a few concluding remarks. The reference there is that it is a tradition at our university that the Vice-Chancellor has the last word. And as I always say, it's a very fine tradition, as far as I'm concerned, a very fine tradition. Neil, first of all, I want to compliment you on your remarks, and indeed a dinner companion last night had a lovely evening. And I too, as I thought about what I might say in these concluding remarks, my thoughts went to history as well. And I do recall a very long time ago going to one of the museums here in Singapore, and there's the story of the 4 trade winds and how they crossed over at this point in Singapore. And for me, the idea of that and the notion of the very appropriate and indeed I think the perfect position of Singapore to see realised not in a way that we're trying to do today through our own centre, which of course we look to make a significant contribution and we're very confident that it will, but to think about Singapore itself and what it has achieved in that crossover point, in that central global point. And it has in fact lived up to that idea of being the central hub for trade, whether it was through the winds initially or indeed through a great deal of human action. So from our point of view, this is a perfect place. It's a perfect place in many ways. It's a perfect place as a model, I think, for what communities can achieve with a clear long-term vision. This is a place that you think about that time when either Singapore left or were let out of the Malaysian community, the Malaysian peninsula, and that union at the time. But you think about what has been achieved here. It is just remarkable. And if there's anywhere in the world to host such a centre, it seems to me that this is the marvel. This is the jewel. This is the inspiring place where such a centre should be located. From a JCU point of view, of course, similarly, it just makes a lot of sense for us to have this hubbed here. And it isn't to say that Australia itself, and certainly Townsville and Cairns, don't have enormous ambitions, and indeed are themselves really very interesting regional cities and regional economies. They are involved internationally. Of course, Cairns has its international airport as well. They have bulk ports. I mean, these are very important cities in and of themselves. And so they too have ambitions that they're realising together with Singapore through the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. So from a James Cook University point of view, as you probably are aware, in our little stack there, we talk about Cairns, Singapore and Townsville. The way that I describe the Singapore campus, certainly when I visit Canberra and visit our own federal politicians, is that this is our capital city campus. And people laugh at that, and then they realise I'm actually dead serious about that. We are an Australian university, but we do have, and we're the only Australian university to have our own fully owned campus, one that we operate here and that we're very proud to do so, where we bring our research and the benefits of some of the excellence that we can offer at our own university in Australia here to Singapore. We do research, we do community engagement, and of course we teach, and we aim to add to the national talent pool here, the human capital in Singapore and across the world as well. So for me, it makes so much good sense for us to have this centre located here as well. And if I can be allowed a personal observation, and a number of you in the room will know this, I spent a number of years as Dean of a very large business school in Australia, and it was one that was AACSB accredited, AMBAR accredited, Equus accredited. I was involved in the boards of those bodies and a joint venture company across those bodies at the time when these organisations were spreading into Australia in particular. I know how important it is that we have a strong representation of business. And again, I take a personal and very special pleasure in business being expressed here and being more thoroughly expressed here, and us working hard to think about how through this particular centre and in other areas that we're operating as well, how we can contribute to the economy, to the prosperity, to business know-how, to not only those industry partners whom we have right now, but to industry more broadly and to community understanding. And that, for me, is certainly here we'll make our own, small contribution here, and hopefully not too small a contribution here and in Asia. But we also want to bring that home to Australia too, because that connectivity is so important to us. The idea that we are, and we do see ourselves to be, and you'll forgive me this, High Commissioner, we do see ourselves as one of the important conduits between Australia and Singapore. And in that, we should be thinking about how we express that thoroughly, how we bring our expertise to bear to serve all of those purposes. So there's a community purpose, there's an industry purpose, there's an educational purpose, there's a research purpose. So, from my point of view, I was really delighted to hear about this initiative. I commend Jacob, you and your colleagues on it. I know we're all looking for this to be a startling success, and I think already it's having traction and making inroads, and we're very, very grateful for that. I think at the end of the day, we just simply need to adopt a forward look on this to think about where it is indeed we can take it. I think the idea of combining the business and trade, knowledge, with urban planning and design, and then we have other threads, of course, in our campus, which goes to other industry sectors, whether that's aquaculture, for example, whether that's psychology, whether that's education. All of that, I think we need to bring to bear as we are looking forward and thinking about what it is that our university can contribute. So I simply want to wish the centre and all those who are within it and those who collaborate with it all the very best. I'm quite certain that there will be a significant contribution made here because I know the sort of people we have here, that's really what they're all about. They're wanting to make a positive contribution to the communities in which we engage and to the industries with which we work. So thank you all very much for coming along today. I'm sure Jacob's going to finish off with some of this as well, but I just wanted to say again, thank you very much. Thank you, Neil, for your very fine remarks. Thank you, Chancellor, as well. And thank you, Jacob. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor, for those very kind words. This is, I guess, the end of the formal aspect of today's event. I'd urge you all to now stay and enjoy the refreshments and wine and beer. It is, after all, Friday afternoon. So I'd urge you to enjoy the rest of your time here at James Cook University, Singapore, and thank you very much for your attendance today. Thank you.